a nurse found a dying woman's bucket list hidden under her pillow. The last item on the list made her quit her job that same day. Sarah Park had been an oncology nurse for 9 years, long enough to know when a patient had stopped fighting. Room 412, Eleanor Rigby. And yes, the nurses joked about the Beatles song, though never where she could hear. Had stage 4 pancreatic cancer and 3 months at best. Eleanor never had visitors. In 9 weeks, the chair beside her bed stayed empty. But Eleanor was never sad. She'd hum tunes during chemo, compliment every nurse. One morning, Sarah found a piece of notebook paper under Eleanor's pillow while changing the sheets. It was a list titled, "Before I Go." Most items were small. See the ocean one more time. Eat a lobster roll. Hear live jazz. Watch a sunrise from somewhere high. The last item, number 7, was underlined 3 times. Make sure someone remembers I was here. Sarah read it and went into the supply closet as she couldn't stop crying. Not because Eleanor was dying. Sarah had accepted death years ago, but because the most generous patient she'd ever met was terrified of being forgotten. Sarah photographed the list and quit her nursing job that Friday. She didn't tell Eleanor why. Over the next 11 weeks, Sarah drove Eleanor to Cape Cod in a borrowed convertible with the top down. Eleanor tasted her first lobster roll at a shack in Provincetown and said, "I've been alive 74 years and never knew this existed." They watched jazz live and watched the sunrise from the top of Cadillac Mountain in Acadia. Sarah documented everything, every laugh, every quiet moment Eleanor thought no one was watching. On the last day, Sarah showed Eleanor a short film she'd been editing at night in her apartment. 12 minutes of Eleanor's life, her voice, her laugh, her joy. It was uploaded to her socials that evening. The last title card read, "Eleanor Rigby was here." And she was extraordinary. A desperate architect missed his once-in-a-lifetime interview to help a confused elderly man on a subway platform. 6 weeks later, a phone call changed his family's life forever. Arthur was 40 years old, standing on a freezing subway platform in his only tailored suit. The bank was legally foreclosing on his house by Friday. His terrified wife and 2 children were relying on him to nail a massive interview with a ruthless development firm that morning. It was his absolute last chance to earn a paycheck. While waiting for his train, Arthur noticed an elderly man wandering dangerously close to the platform edge, shouting frantically,
"I'm late for work! I'm late for my shift!"
Arthur looked at the approaching train and thought that if he missed this train, he would miss the interview and lose his home. But if he walked away, this panicked man might fall onto the tracks. Arthur stepped back, knowing how a dementia loop looks from taking care of his late father. He immediately recognized it. He gently handed his own leather portfolio to the stranger.
"Here are the blueprints, sir. You're right on time."
The old man instantly stopped shaking, clutching the heavy book like a lifeline.
"Why are you here?"
Sir, we're here because you need some help, a doctor.
"We're just here to check up on you."
Arthur didn't fight him. He let the stranger keep his entire career portfolio, missing his interview entirely and accepting his financial ruin. 6 weeks later, a woman named Grace called the number inside the portfolio. Her father Howard was lucid again and wouldn't stop talking about the young man with the blueprints. Grace wasn't rich. She was a history teacher fighting a legal battle against the exact firm Arthur had tried to interview with. They were condemning Howard's historic brownstone to demolish it. She'd looked through Arthur's portfolio and found page after page of restoration work, buildings saved, not destroyed. She didn't offer charity. She offered a partnership, firing the corporate firm and hiring Arthur to lead the restoration. The advance cleared his foreclosure that week. Arthur built his own practice, saving the buildings others wanted to tear down. On the first day of construction, Howard showed up in a hard hat, still clutching Arthur's leather portfolio. He still called it the blueprints. Arthur never corrected him. An elderly carpenter gave his grandfather's priceless antique toolbox to a struggling young father. 2 weeks later, a wealthy stranger knocked on his empty workshop door and changed his life forever. Arthur was 80 years old, his hands gnarled by decades of arthritis. He could no longer hold a simple hammer. His only remaining wealth was a weathered, heavy toolbox. It had hand-forged woodworking tools, passed down from his grandfather. They were his heartbeat, the last physical proof that his long life of shaping and carving beautiful wood had truly meant something.
This one's going to be a beauty.
But across the quiet street, his neighbor David was weeping in his driveway. Thieves had stolen David's entire work, wiping out the young carpenter's livelihood in a single night. When Arthur watched David hammering a bank's "for sale" sign into his front lawn, he did the heartbreaking math. Without tools to earn a living, David's 2 little girls would be sleeping in a homeless shelter before the month was over.
Take your time, no rush.
That night, fighting through the bitter cold and his own agonizing physical pain, Arthur carried his grandfather's heavy toolbox across the street. He left it on David's porch with a hastily scribbled note. These tools hate to be idle. Arthur returned to his freezing, empty house, fully knowing he had just given away his only financial safety net. Weeks passed. David used those antique woodworking tools to work on a massive historical restoration project. The lead contractor on the site, a man who worshipped old-world wood craftsmanship, immediately noticed the rare maker's mark carved into the antique handles. Recognizing the lost art of a true master, he tracked the tools back to Arthur's freezing living room. The contractor didn't come to buy the antique tools. He came to save the man. He hired Arthur as a highly paid master consultant.
Great to see you, friend. Until next week. Until next week, my friend.
Today, Arthur sits safely by a warm wood stove, proudly watching young apprentices keep his grandfather's legacy alive. A bankrupt bookstore owner gave his most valuable book to a crying student. 6 months later, a famous publisher did something that changed his life forever. Elias had spent 50 years running the painted page, but the digital age had finally defeated him. With the bank seizing his building in a few weeks, his last remaining asset was a flawless, signed first edition copy of The Great Gatsby. He kept it in a locked glass case. His plan was to auction the masterpiece, just to survive his impending eviction. One rainy afternoon, Elias overheard a regular customer.
I don't know what to do, Mom. They told me there was a mistake in the paperwork and now I am screwed.
Julian's academic scholarship had just been revoked over a paperwork error. He had to pay his tuition by next week. Otherwise, he would be forced to drop out of law school entirely. Elias stared at his own bank notice for a few seconds, but he decided that a young man's bright future mattered far more than an old man's comfort. He silently unlocked the display case. While Julian's back was turned, he slid the novel into the teenager's open backpack with a handwritten note saying, "Sell this to Hargrove Rare Books on 5th. Ask for Daniel. Tell him Elias sent you." Elias closed his doors for good and moved into a cramped, run-down studio. Julian went to Hargrove. There, Daniel authenticated the book and paid Julian enough to cover his full tuition. But when Daniel showed the acquisition to his firm's biggest client, one of the city's biggest publishing company's CEO, he froze at the sight of Elias's personal bookplate stamped inside the cover. 30 years ago, he had wandered into the painted page as a broke intern who couldn't afford the literary journals he needed. Elias let him read in the shop for free every day for 2 years and never charged him once. He built his entire career on the foundation of those afternoons. The CEO purchased the foreclosed building himself and handed the deed directly to Elias. Today, Julian is a practicing attorney, and the old man's beloved shop will remain open for the rest of his life. An armored truck guard abandoned $20,000 to save a drowning boy. 6 weeks later, a woman changed his family's life forever. Daniel was 32, working as a cash transport guard. He had spent 2 years fighting for this dangerous promotion, just to afford his daughter's expensive asthma medications. His corporate boss's rule was absolute. Never let the deposit bag out of your hands. While carrying a heavy bag of bank deposits across a boardwalk, Daniel heard a panicked splash.
Hey! Does anyone have a guard here? We need help!
Daniel looked at the heavy chain bag in his hand, then at the sinking child. If he jumped with the bag, the water-soaked cash and the chain on his wrist would drag them both under. If he left it on the public boardwalk, it would be stolen, and he would face prison. But Daniel had spent nights in the ICU watching his own daughter fight to breathe. He knew what that boy's mother was about to feel. Daniel unclicked the bag, dropped $20,000 onto the busy pier, and dove into the freezing rapids.
Hold on, don't panic. I got you.
While he was in the water, someone stole the money.
We are gonna be playing hero, huh? You can't even do a simple job, right? After so much time at this company, and I think I expected so much more.
He had saved a child's life and was being punished for it. 6 weeks later, the boy's mother knocked on Daniel's door.
See, I read the police report. I know you did the right thing.
She saw a corporation trying to destroy the man who saved her son, took Daniel's case for free, cleared his name in court, and countersued the firm. The settlement was enough for Daniel to start his own independent security company. On his first day in the new office, he hung a drawing the boy had made of the boardwalk, 2 stick figures in the water, and the words, "He jumped," written in crayon at the top.
I feed people. I don't deceive them.
A chef walked out during a Friday dinner rush rather than serve fake food. 6 weeks later, a farmer knocked on his door and changed everything. Martin was 39, working as head chef at a popular downtown bistro. It had taken him 10 grueling years to earn that title, and every paycheck went straight to keeping his grandmother in her assisted living home, the same woman who taught him to cook in her cramped kitchen, using only what they could pull from the dirt, when a corporate group bought the restaurant. The new manager marched into the kitchen with boxes of frozen synthetic shortcuts.
I need you to throw out all the locally sourced vegetables.
And used cheap chemical pastes to cut costs. Martin stared at the industrial plastic bags. His grandmother always said feeding people was a sacred trust. He knew if he walked out, he wouldn't make rent on Friday. But he untied his apron, dropped it on the prep table and said he walked out the back door during the dinner rush, fully accepting his financial ruin. 3 weeks later, a woman stood on Martin's porch. She was the calloused, hard-working owner of the local farm, whose produce the corporate bistro had cancelled the day Martin left. Word had travelled through the supply chain about the chef who threw away his career rather than betray her harvest. She didn't offer charity.
When do we start?
And told him to build whatever he wanted. Today the barn is booked out months in advance. Martin cooks every dish with ingredients pulled from the same soil that morning, and on the wall behind the pass, above every plate that leaves his kitchen, hangs a handwritten recipe card in his grandmother's shaky cursive. A tomato sauce, the first thing she ever taught him. He's never taken it down. A 12-year-old boy sold his late father's watch to pay for his mom's surgery. Then, a stranger showed up at the hospital and changed everything. Marcus Williams was 12 when he walked into a pawn shop, holding the only thing his father left him, a 1978 Omega Seamaster with a scratched face and a leather band, worn soft from years on his dad's wrist. His father, James, had worn it through 2 combat tours, through Marcus's birth, through every Little League game. Incidentally, he was wearing it the night of the accident that took him away from them. Marcus's mother, Denise, had placed it on the child's nightstand the day of the funeral and said,
"This is your father's heartbeat now, baby. Don't you ever let it go."
Marcus wore it daily, without exceptions, for years, despite the fact it hung loose on his wrist, and the kids at school laughed at him. Marcus did the math on their kitchen table, something no 12-year-old should know how to do, and realized they were $22,000 short. He took the watch off for the first time since the funeral and walked several blocks to the pawn shop alone. The owner offered only $180. However, Marcus didn't negotiate. He placed the money in his mother's hospital bag and told her instead that the church had donated it. The pawn shop owner, a man named Gil Reeves, put the watch in the display case and thought nothing of it until his own son came home from middle school that day talking about a kid named Marcus, whose mom was sick and whose dad's watch was gone. Gil closed the shop early, drove to the hospital, and walked into Denise's room, holding the Omega in one hand and an envelope in the other. Gil told Denise he'd served with James at Camp Pendleton back in '03. Gil put the watch back on Marcus's wrist himself, looked him in the eyes, and said, "Your dad's still ticking, kid."
Everything worked out.
The mother's
didn't
surgery
it?
was successful.
All because of you.
And 6 years later, Marcus is still proudly wearing his watch. A night shift security guard abandoned his post to save a freezing puppy from a storm drain. The next morning, the building's billionaire owner called him personally and changed his life forever. Elias was 45, working the graveyard shift at a prestigious downtown corporate tower. He was barely scraping by, taking double shifts. Just to cover his wife's cancer treatments, his supervisor enforced a zero-tolerance policy: leave the front desk for 5 minutes and you're terminated. His paycheck was the only thing keeping a roof over his family. During a torrential thunderstorm at 3 a.m., Elias watched the perimeter cameras and saw a stray puppy slip through a loose grate into the flooding storm drain. The water was rising fast. He knew what losing this job meant, but when he was 9, his family dog Biscuit got caught in a flash flood behind their house. His father held him back, said it was too dangerous. Biscuit didn't make it, but he wasn't 9 anymore. He sprinted into the freezing rain, and after spending 20 agonizing minutes in the mud, prying the iron grate open with his bare hands until they bled, he saved the dog. Elias walked back into the lobby, soaking wet, cradling the puppy against his chest. His manager was already standing at the desk.
After everything I did for you, this is how you repay me.
Elias walked home in the rain with the trembling puppy inside his jacket. He sat on his kitchen floor at 4 a.m, feeding the dog, and wondering how he was going to tell his wife the treatments were over. While reviewing the perimeter tapes to assess storm damage, the owner of the building found the footage of Elias and watched it 3 times without moving. 20 years ago, this man had driven past a car accident on the shoulder of a highway. He told himself someone else would stop. No one did. She died that night and had haunted him ever since. He tracked Elias down by the next afternoon. He didn't just rehire him. He fired the manager, offered Elias the head of security position at his private estate, and covered his wife's full medical treatment. Elias asked why. The man looked at the puppy asleep on Elias's couch.
Because you stopped when it mattered.
The dog's name is Biscuit. She goes to work with Elias every day. A desperate job applicant risked his entire career to defend a deaf candidate during a group interview. What he didn't know was that this action would change his life forever. Marcus Cole was 24 and down to his last $40, 30 of which he'd already assigned to the electric bill sitting unopened on his kitchen counter. He was wearing his dead uncle's suit, taken in at the waist by a neighbour, and shoes he'd polished with petroleum jelly because he couldn't afford the real thing. He was sitting in the final stage of an interview for an analyst position that paid more than his mother had ever made in a year. There were 4 candidates left, 2 of which were Ivy League graduates who arrived together laughing about a ski trip. Then Maya, a quiet woman who hadn't spoken much but had sketched the most detailed data framework Marcus had ever seen. Maya had been deaf since birth. That morning, for the first time in 26 years, she had heard her own voice. Her cochlear implants were less than 9 hours old. Every sound in the room, the air conditioning, the click of a pen, hit her like a wave she hadn't learned to swim in yet. She kept her hair down and listened. During the strategy break, the 2 candidates leaned toward Marcus while Maya studied a monitor across the room. "We cut her speaking time to 0, one said, adjusting his cufflink.
She's a liability. Client repeats one question and we all look incompetent. She handles the clicker, we handle the room."
Marcus looked to the glass doors where the hiring managers were watching. He knew pushing back now would get him labelled as difficult. He had no safety net, no second interview or uncle with another suit to lend. He shoved his chair back hard enough for the legs to bark against the floor.
If she's not leading the pitch, I'm walking out.
She's the only one who actually understands the data. Maya turned around. Her eyes were wet but steady. She spoke with perfect clarity.
"I heard every word, and I'm taking the lead."
The firm's CEO had been watching from the back the entire time. He dismissed the other 2 candidates and walked directly to Marcus.
"We can teach financial modeling. We can't teach a man when to stand up."
He offered him the position in front of everyone. Maya got hired too. She asked to be on Marcus's team. A homeless veteran gave his jacket to a lost little boy in a snowstorm. 4 weeks later, a rich stranger changed his life forever. Robert served in Fallujah and came home with a bronze star, a titanium plate in his hip, and unending nightmares. His wife Cheryl tried to stay, but the screaming at 3 a.m, the pills that stopped working, the missed appointments because Robert couldn't sit in waiting rooms without his hands shaking, it hollowed her out. She left one day while Robert was at physical therapy and took their son Jack with her. Robert didn't fight the custody ruling because his lawyer said he'd lose anyway. Cheryl moved states, and they lost touch. Robert held his job at an auto shop for 8 more months before his knee gave out. No surgery, no job, no family. He was living under an overpass in Philadelphia by winter. Robert heard crying near a parking lot. A boy, standing alone in a thin hoodie, shaking. Robert pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around the kid. He knelt down to distract the boy, until his mother came running across the lot. She grabbed her son, looked up to thank the stranger, but Robert had just left. He spent that night in freezing weather with no jacket, but didn't think about it again. 4 weeks later, she pulled up. The woman found him in his tent, thinner than before. She was a CEO of a logistics company. Her son still had Robert's jacket in his closet.
I have something for you. It's a new beginning, a new place to live, and a surgery.
Robert said.
I just gave you my jacket.
Catherine said.
Thank you for saving my son's life.
Thank you, mister.
Robert started the job and had surgery soon after. That night, Cheryl had seen the news story about Robert and told Jack his father was a hero.